The summer afternoon should have been ordinary. I should have been finishing my shift at the hospital, reviewing patient charts, and driving home hours later like I always did. Instead, a last-minute schedule change sent me home early, and that unexpected decision may have saved my daughter's life. My name is Claire. I'm 37 years old, and I'm a trauma surgeon. My job has taught me how to stay calm in situations that make most people panic. Blood, chaos, grief, and fear are all things I've learned to navigate with precision. But nothing in my medical career prepared me for the sound I heard when I unlocked my front door that afternoon. My daughter was crying. Not an ordinary cry. Not frustration or disappointment. This was fear. Pure fear. My entire body froze for half a second before instinct took over. I pushed the door open a little farther and immediately stopped moving. Inside my living room stood my father, Robert, towering over my 10-year-old daughter, Sophie. He was speaking in a low, threatening voice while blocking the hallway. At the same time, my older sister, Victoria, was inside my bedroom ripping through my belongings. Drawers hung open. Clothes covered the floor. Documents were scattered everywhere. My mother's old jewelry box was missing. Someone had been searching for something very specific. The surgeon in me immediately began organizing the situation. Protect Sophie. Identify the threat. Preserve evidence. Call for help. The mother in me wanted to run straight at them. Instead, I quietly stepped backward, pulled out my phone, and dialed emergency services. I lowered my voice to a whisper. My family broke into my house. They're threatening my daughter. Please send police immediately. The operator told me to remain on the line. I obeyed. Every second felt heavy. Sophie stood perfectly still, trying not to cry louder. Children sometimes become silent when they're terrified because they believe making noise will make things worse. That realization broke my heart. Robert leaned closer to her. Tell us where your mother keeps the blue folder. Sophie shook her head. I don't know. Victoria shouted from my bedroom. She's lying. Claire always hides important things. I gripped my phone tighter. The operator could hear enough to understand this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. I slowly moved closer and listened. Robert sighed dramatically. Your mother is selfish, Sophie. If she loved this family, she would help us. Sophie's voice trembled. Please don't yell. That was the moment something inside me changed forever. I had spent years helping them. Years. I paid debts. I covered emergencies. I loaned money that was never repaid. I sacrificed time with my daughter because I believed family deserved endless patience. Every time they asked for help, I gave it. Every time they crossed a boundary, I forgave them. And every single time, they learned that my guilt had a price. But this was different. They weren't asking anymore. They had come into my home while I was supposed to be at work. They had cornered my daughter. And they were searching for something valuable enough to risk everything. This wasn't desperation. It was a plan. Victoria suddenly walked out of my bedroom holding several folders. Found the apartment papers, as she said. Robert cursed. But not the transfer certificate. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. Then we'll force Claire to sign new ones. Victoria laughed. You think she'll do it after this? Robert answered without hesitation. She will if she wants her daughter to stop being scared. My breathing became slow and controlled. Years of manipulation suddenly made sense. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. They had prepared for this. They knew my schedule. They knew where I kept documents. They knew exactly when I'd be gone. The operator's voice quietly spoke through my phone. Officers are on the way. Are you safe? I looked at my daughter standing there, terrified inside the home I had worked my entire life to build. I whispered one sentence. Not yet. Then I took one final step forward and prepared to confront the people I had spent years protecting, without realizing they had been planning this moment for far longer than I ever imagined. When I stepped into the living room, Sophie saw me first. Relief flooded her face so quickly that it almost broke my heart. Robert turned around immediately, and Victoria appeared behind him holding my mother's necklace in one hand. For a brief moment, nobody moved. Then I said, Sophie, come to me." Robert shifted as if he wanted to block her path, but I raised my phone. "Don't do that." My voice was calm, but every word carried a warning. Robert narrowed his eyes. "Are you recording us?" I nodded. Victoria laughed nervously. "You're recording your own family?" I shook my head. "No. I'm recording 2 adults who broke into my house, stole jewelry, threatened a child, and searched for documents they have no right to touch." Sophie hurried toward me and wrapped her arms around my waist. The moment I felt her trembling, every ounce of guilt I once carried disappeared. Robert took a step forward. "Watch how you speak to your father." Years ago, that sentence would have silenced me. Back then, I confused obedience with respect. I believed saying no made me selfish. But standing there beside my daughter, I finally understood something important. Real love does not demand fear. Real family does not use children as bargaining tools. "You are not in charge here anymore," I said quietly. Victoria slammed a folder onto the coffee table. Papers slid everywhere. "This is unfair," she snapped. "You have everything while we struggle." I stared at her for a moment. I worked for everything I have. Robert laughed bitterly. "We sacrificed for you." I answered immediately. "No. You borrowed from my kindness until you believed you owned it." Neither of them expected me to respond without apologizing. Their expressions changed instantly. Then I noticed something else. My spare house key was missing. A memory surfaced. Sophie had celebrated her birthday 3 months earlier, and Victoria had volunteered to help clean up afterward. She stayed in the kitchen longer than necessary. Suddenly, it all made sense. "You took my key that day," I said. Victoria looked away. Robert slammed his hand onto the table. "That isn't important. Sign the papers and we can solve everything." "Temporarily transfer your apartment shares," Robert said. "Then Rachel's debts disappear." He caught himself too late after saying the wrong name, then corrected it. "Victoria's debts disappear." I almost smiled because panic was beginning to crack their performance. "So that's what this is really about," I said. "You planned this." Robert lowered his voice. "If you don't cooperate, things will become difficult." Sophie squeezed my hand tighter. At that exact moment, distant sirens echoed outside. Robert froze. Victoria's face lost all color. Their confidence evaporated in seconds. Suddenly they became softer, calmer, and desperate. "Claire, don't do this," Victoria whispered. Please. We're family. I looked directly at her. Family doesn't terrorize a child. Robert stepped closer. Tell the police this was a misunderstanding. I shook my head. No. For once, I'm telling the truth. The sirens grew louder until they stopped directly outside my house. Heavy footsteps approached the front door. Robert reached toward my arm, but I moved away before he could touch me. The door opened, and 2 police officers entered with calm authority. Everyone stay where you are, one officer said. Robert immediately changed his posture and raised his hands. Officers, this is just a family disagreement. But his voice no longer sounded confident. I stood beside Sophie and held up my phone. I have the entire interaction recorded, and emergency services have been listening since I arrived. One officer looked at me while the other looked at Victoria's bag sitting on the floor. Inside that bag was the evidence that would destroy every lie they had prepared. But none of us knew yet that discovering its contents would reveal a much bigger plan that had already been unfolding for months. What they had done inside my house was terrible enough, but someone had also obtained my hospital schedule, tracked my movements, and prepared forged paperwork long before today. The police were about to uncover details that would transform a family betrayal into a criminal investigation for everyone involved. Officer Bennett asked Victoria to place her bag on the floor. She hesitated for a moment before finally dropping it beside the coffee table. The room became completely silent. Sophie stood behind me while I kept one arm around her shoulders. Every person in that room understood that whatever was inside the bag could change everything. Officer Bennett slowly opened it and began removing items one by one. First came my mother's pearl necklace. Then 2 rings. Then my spare house key. Then several transfer forms. And finally, a fake notary stamp. Officer Carter looked up immediately. Whose documents are these? Victoria said nothing. Robert stared at the floor. That silence answered the question better than words ever could. The officers separated everyone. Sophie and I moved toward the kitchen while Robert immediately changed his strategy. I'm a grandfather, he said. I was trying to help my family. Officer Carter didn't react. By threatening a child? He asked. Robert opened his mouth but couldn't answer. Victoria suddenly burst into tears, but something about it felt rehearsed. She wasn't crying because she felt guilty. She was crying because she had been caught. Then Officer Bennett turned toward Sophie. Sweetheart, are you hurt? She shook her head. But then she whispered something that changed the entire atmosphere. He said Mommy would lose our house if I didn't help. The room became still. Officer Carter immediately placed handcuffs on Robert. Robert protested. Claire, don't do this. You're destroying the family. I looked directly into his eyes. No, I said calmly. I'm protecting what's left of it. Victoria began shouting. The jewelry belongs to the family. Officer Bennett held up the evidence bag. It was found inside your purse. Her face turned pale. Outside, several neighbors had gathered on their porches. For the first time in years, Robert looked embarrassed instead of angry. Humiliation had finally reached him. And for people like him, embarrassment often hurts more than guilt. After they were taken outside, Officer Carter remained behind. Do you have somewhere safe to stay tonight? I looked around my own house. Broken frames. Scattered papers. Open drawers. A frightened child. For years, I thought safety meant having a strong front door. I realized then that safety meant knowing who was no longer allowed to walk through it. "We'll be okay," I said. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. That evening, Sophie slept beside me with the hallway light turned on. Every sound outside made her grip my hand tighter. At one point, she whispered, "Is Grandpa coming back?" I kissed her forehead. "No." She hesitated. Did I do something wrong? That question hurt more than anything Robert had said. I turned toward her. Absolutely not. Adults made bad choices. None of this is your fault. She nodded, but children don't recover instantly. Their bodies remember fear long after danger disappears. The next morning, I started repairing everything I could. I changed every lock. Cancelled every spare key. Called my bank. Protected my accounts. Moved every important document into secure storage. Then my phone rang. It was Detective Morgan. "We found something concerning," she said. I already expected bad news. I just didn't expect how serious it would be. At the police station, Detective Morgan spread several items across a table. The fake notary stamp. Transfer paperwork. And something else. My hospital schedule. Every shift. Every double shift. Every day I was supposed to be away from home. Someone had studied my movements. This wasn't random. This wasn't desperation. This was planning. "Who had access to your schedule?" she asked. Immediately, memories surfaced. Victoria asking if I still worked late Tuesdays. Robert offering to pick Sophie up from school. Questions that once seemed harmless. Now they looked dangerous. Then Detective Morgan said something that sent a chill down my spine. "This wasn't planned for a few days," she said. "It may have been planned for months." I sat there in complete silence. Everything suddenly connected. The key. The schedule. The documents. The pressure. The timing. My family hadn't simply decided to steal from me. They had been building a strategy piece by piece while smiling at family dinners and pretending everything was normal. And I was about to discover they weren't only after my jewelry or my house. They were after something worth far more than I ever imagined. That evening, my attorney and longtime friend, Daniel, sat across from me at the kitchen table reviewing everything the police had recovered. He was usually calm, but his expression had become unusually serious. "This wasn't a family argument, Claire," he said. I nodded. "I know." He slid several documents toward me. Then he pointed to one number. I stared at it. My apartment shares, the inheritance my mother had left me years ago, had grown tremendously in value. 7 figures. My stomach tightened. I had known the investment had appreciated over time, but I had never imagined it had reached that level. Daniel leaned back. They weren't after jewelry. I looked at him. The jewelry was a bonus, he said. They wanted control. Everything suddenly became clearer. The blue folder. The forged documents. The fake notary stamp. My schedule. The threats. They had built an entire plan around stealing ownership. And they had been willing to use Sophie to get it. The realization made me cold. A few days later, Victoria launched her next attack. This time, it wasn't inside my house. It was online. She posted a long message about betrayal, greed, and an ungrateful sister who had forgotten her family after becoming successful. She painted herself as a victim. She talked about sacrifices. She talked about financial struggles. She talked about how money changes people. But she never mentioned Sophie. She never mentioned the fake documents. She never mentioned being arrested. My phone exploded with messages. Some relatives believed her. Some wanted answers. Some simply wanted drama. For years, I would have explained myself. I would have written paragraphs. I would have defended my choices. Not anymore. I sent one message to the family group chat. A child was threatened inside my home. Police recovered evidence. This is now an active legal matter. My attorney will respond to further false claims. Then I put my phone down. Silence became my answer. And silence turned out to be far more powerful than defending myself. Within 2 days, people started asking questions. Some relatives checked public arrest records. Others called local offices. One by one, Victoria's story began falling apart. An aunt apologized. Then a cousin. Then a neighbor who had repeated Robert's version knocked on my door carrying dinner and tears in her eyes. Victoria eventually deleted her post. Too late. Screenshots never disappear. Daniel saved everything. For years, my family had depended on my guilt. Now they were about to meet my documentation. And documentation doesn't get manipulated. It doesn't cry. It doesn't argue. It simply tells the truth. Meanwhile, Sophie had started seeing a child therapist. At first, I worried she would resist. Instead, she quietly accepted it. One afternoon, I picked her up after school. She sat quietly in the car before asking a question. Mom? Yes? Does family mean you have to forgive people? I took a deep breath. That question deserved an honest answer. Forgiveness is a choice, I said. But safety is not optional. She looked at me carefully. You can forgive someone one day and still never let them back into your life. She nodded slowly. I could tell she was trying to understand. Children often understand more than adults realize. That evening, Detective Morgan called. We recovered text messages between Robert and Victoria. I felt my chest tighten. Were they bad? She paused. Worse than we expected. The next morning, she allowed me to read a portion of them. Victoria had written, "If Sophie gets scared, Claire will give us whatever we want." Robert replied, "Don't hurt the kid. Just make her understand this is Claire's fault." I read the messages 3 times. My hands started shaking. Don't hurt the kid. As if fear wasn't harm. As if terrorizing a 10-year-old child was acceptable. At that moment, every remaining ounce of guilt disappeared forever. I wasn't fighting against struggling family members anymore. I was fighting against people who had planned to use my daughter as leverage. And for the first time in my life, I stopped seeing them as people I needed to save. I started seeing them as people I needed to stop. Because court was approaching. And once all of the evidence was presented, Robert and Victoria were going to discover something they never expected. The woman they had manipulated for years was no longer trying to protect them. Preparing for court felt strangely familiar to me. As a trauma surgeon, I had spent years diagnosing problems quickly and acting before they became fatal. This process felt similar. Gather the evidence. Study the damage. Remove the danger. Protect what could still be saved. Daniel organized everything carefully. Bank transfers. Phone messages. Security logs. Photos. Repair estimates. Police reports. Sophie's therapy recommendations. Every piece fit together perfectly. Then Detective Morgan delivered another update. They've been tracking your schedule for nearly 6 months. I stared at her. 6 months? She nodded. Long enough to learn your routines and identify opportunities. That thought unsettled me more than anything else. My family had spent months pretending everything was normal while quietly building a plan behind my back. Robert had offered to help with school pickups. Victoria had volunteered during birthdays. Both had asked innocent questions. Every interaction suddenly looked different. Daniel leaned forward. This case is stronger than they realize. I nodded slowly. But I don't want revenge. He smiled gently. Good. Because this isn't revenge. It's accountability. That single sentence stayed with me. Meanwhile, Robert's reputation had already started falling apart. People at his church learned about the arrest. Neighbors stopped greeting him warmly. The stories he'd been spreading no longer worked. Truth was replacing manipulation. Victoria's situation became worse. The company where she worked immediately suspended her. Her application for a future real estate license was flagged. Doors started closing everywhere. For years, both of them believed consequences only happened to other people. Now consequences had finally reached them. One afternoon, Victoria called me from an unknown number. Daniel was sitting beside me. He activated a recorder. I answered. She immediately began crying. Claire, please. If this goes to court, I'll lose everything. I remained calm. You should have thought about that before entering my house. I was desperate. You terrified Sophie. Robert was the one yelling. And you were the one stealing. Silence. Then she said something I expected. Mom would be ashamed of you. I looked at my mother's photograph sitting on the shelf nearby. The frame had been repaired after she knocked it over during her search. I smiled sadly. No, I said. Mom was the person who taught me to protect what matters. Victoria became quiet. Then she hung up. That recording immediately became evidence. A few days later, Sophie's therapist recommended that she avoid appearing in court. Instead, she would participate in a child interview with specialists. I agreed immediately. The last thing I wanted was for her to sit in a room surrounded by adults arguing about her fear. During the interview, she held a stuffed fox while answering questions. I watched from another room. How did you feel? The interviewer asked. She looked down. Scared. What scared you? Grandpa said Mommy would lose everything. How did that make you feel? She paused. Like our home wasn't safe anymore. I closed my eyes. That sentence alone carried more weight than dozens of legal documents. Children rarely exaggerate. They simply tell the truth. And sometimes, simple truth is the most powerful evidence of all. That night, Sophie sat at the kitchen table drawing. She drew our house. She drew trees. She drew police cars. Then she drew me standing in front of her. "Is that you?" I asked. She nodded. "You were scared too." I smiled softly. I was. "But you stayed." I sat beside her. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. She smiled. For the first time in days, she looked peaceful. But my peace would have to wait. Because court was tomorrow morning. And tomorrow, Robert and Victoria would hear every piece of evidence presented publicly. Their lies. Their plans. Their messages. Their manipulation. Everything. For years, they believed family loyalty would protect them. Tomorrow, they were about to learn something very different. Family loyalty ends where a child's safety begins. And once a courtroom hears the truth, there is no hiding behind excuses anymore. The courtroom felt colder than I expected. Robert sat beside his attorney wearing a grey jacket he always wore to serious occasions. For years, that jacket had helped him appear respectable. Today, it couldn't hide the truth. Victoria sat nearby with perfectly arranged hair and red eyes, trying to look like a victim. But something had changed. Neither of them looked confident anymore. When they saw me walk in with Daniel, both immediately looked away. That alone told me they were afraid. Not of me. Of the evidence. The hearing began quietly. Then the prosecutor played the emergency call. My whisper echoed through the courtroom. My family broke into my house. They're threatening my daughter. The room fell silent. Then Robert's voice could be heard demanding the blue folder. Victoria lowered her head. Next came security footage. There she was. Walking into my bedroom. Opening drawers. Searching through my belongings. Then came photographs. The jewelry. The fake notary stamp. The transfer forms. My highlighted hospital schedule. One piece after another. Every lie collapsed. Then Detective Morgan read the messages. If Sophie gets scared, Claire will fold. The entire courtroom became still. I didn't look at Robert. I didn't look at Victoria. I looked at the judge. I wanted her to understand one thing. This was never a family disagreement. This was manipulation. This was planning. This was a child being used as leverage. When it was my turn to testify, I remained calm. Years inside operating rooms had taught me something valuable. Emotion can exist without losing control. I explained everything. What I saw. What I heard. What they said. What they did. And most importantly, how it affected Sophie. Then Robert's attorney stood up. Dr. Clare, is it possible exhaustion influenced your judgment after working long hours? I looked directly at him. I've worked 20-hour shifts and still known the difference between a family visit and a burglary. Several people shifted in their seats. The attorney immediately moved on. Then Victoria spoke. She cried. She said she was desperate. She blamed debt. She blamed stress. She blamed Robert. Robert blamed family pressure. He blamed financial hardship. He blamed my refusal to help. But neither of them said something very important. Neither said, "We were wrong." Neither said, "We shouldn't have terrified Sophie." Neither said, "We shouldn't have entered your house." The judge noticed. Everyone noticed. Daniel sat behind me with years of evidence organized neatly inside a folder. For years, Robert and Victoria had treated paperwork like a weapon. Now paperwork had become a wall they couldn't climb. Then the judge spoke. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Financial hardship does not create ownership over another person's home, property, or child. Every word landed heavily. She continued. Family status does not reduce this offense. It increases the betrayal. I felt Sophie squeeze my hand. Then came the consequences. Robert accepted charges involving burglary, attempted extortion, and child endangerment. Victoria accepted charges involving burglary, theft, attempted fraud, and violations related to the case. Both received jail sentences, probation, restitution orders, counseling requirements, and strict no-contact orders protecting Sophie and me. The forged paperwork became permanently void. Additional legal protections were placed around my inheritance. Financial penalties were imposed. When Robert heard the total amount, his shoulders dropped. For the first time in my life, he looked small. Victoria scanned the room searching for sympathy. Most people looked away. That silence spoke louder than words. Because people were finally understanding something important. Being family does not automatically make someone safe. And being exposed does not automatically make someone a victim. After the hearing ended, one of my relatives approached me with tears in her eyes. "I didn't know," she said quietly. Years ago, I would have comforted her immediately. Today, I simply nodded. "Now you do." Then Sophie and I walked outside together. The cold Wyoming air hit our faces. She looked up at me. "Can they come back home?" I squeezed her hand. "No." Then I added something even more important. "Not while I'm here." But even though the court case was over, our real healing journey was only beginning. Because some wounds aren't repaired by verdicts. They're repaired by rebuilding trust, creating safety, and learning that protecting your peace is sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do. The weeks after court felt strangely peaceful. Not because everything was fixed overnight. Nothing that painful disappears that quickly. But for the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the weight of other people's choices. I wasn't answering desperate phone calls. I wasn't solving problems I didn't create. I wasn't sacrificing my peace to keep someone else comfortable. The house became quiet again. A different kind of quiet. A stronger one. I replaced the broken picture frame in my bedroom. I upgraded the security system. I changed passwords. I secured every document. But I didn't try to repair something else. The illusion. The illusion that Robert and Victoria would someday become different people. That illusion was finally gone. And strangely enough, losing it felt liberating. Life slowly returned to normal. I went back to surgery. Sophie returned to school. We cooked dinner together. We watched movies. We laughed more often. Ordinary life began to feel extraordinary. One evening, Sophie sat beside me on the couch. "Mom?" "Yes?" Are we still a family? I smiled softly. That question deserved an answer she'd remember forever. Yes. She looked at me curiously. Who is our family then? I thought for a moment. Then I said, a family is made of people who love us without trying to control us. She smiled. So it's us? Us, I said. And everyone who protects our peace. She leaned against me. For the first time in a long while, she looked completely relaxed. No fear. No anxiety. Just peace. Months passed. Some relatives apologized. Some quietly disappeared. Others chose to stay neutral. I no longer chased anyone's approval. That chapter of my life was over. One day, Daniel called. Victoria sent another request. I sighed. What does she want? She wants the restitution reduced because starting over is difficult. I almost laughed. For years, I had been the person everyone called whenever life became difficult. Not anymore. What did you tell her? Daniel smiled. Dr. Claire declines. Simple. Professional. Final. Later that night, I sat on the porch watching the Wyoming sunset. Sophie sat beside me drawing in her notebook. The wind moved softly through the trees. For years, I thought being a good daughter meant endless sacrifice. I thought love meant tolerance. I thought forgiveness meant access. I was wrong. Love without boundaries becomes exploitation. Forgiveness without protection becomes permission. And family without respect becomes danger. Those lessons cost me years of my life. But they also gave me something valuable. Freedom. The freedom to say no. The freedom to choose peace. The freedom to protect my child without guilt. And perhaps most importantly, the freedom to stop confusing blood with obligation. A few minutes later, Sophie held up a drawing. Our house. The trees. The front porch. The two of us standing together. No police cars this time. No fear. Just home. She handed it to me. Do you like it? I smiled. I love it. Then she pointed at the picture. We're safe now. I looked at her for a moment. Then I nodded. Yes. We are. But I also knew something else. Safety isn't something someone gives you. It's something you build. It's something you protect. And sometimes, protecting it means closing the door on people you once believed would always belong inside. If there's one lesson this experience taught me, it's this. You are not selfish for protecting your peace. You are not cruel for setting boundaries. And you are not a bad person for refusing to sacrifice your child's safety to satisfy someone else's demands. Because love should never require fear. And family should never feel like a threat. As for Robert and Victoria, they finally faced consequences. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I finally stopped rescuing them from their own decisions. And once truth has witnesses, it becomes impossible to hide forever. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do isn't fighting harder. Sometimes it's simply refusing to surrender anymore. If this story touched you, remember this. Protecting your peace is not selfish. Setting boundaries is not cruelty. And choosing your child's safety over toxic family loyalty is one of the strongest decisions a parent can make. If you enjoyed this emotional story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more mature, suspenseful,